Alright, so in the previous discussions, we have discussed the introduction of the play and the prologue, in which I talked about the arrival of Orestes accompanied by Pylades, his friend, son of King Strophius, and the old man who saved Orestes right after Agamemnon's assassination by Clytemnestra and took him away into a distant city where he was brought up by the old man. Now, as the play proceeds, and I ended the previous discussion on mother-daughter relationship as explored by Sophocles in the play. So we'll continue with the same point. Here we notice that Electra has deep-rooted contempt for her mother, mainly for murdering her father unfairly and then allowing, or rather developing, this sexual relationship with another man. At the same time, on the other hand, Clytemnestra's treatment of Electra is also not justifiable. It is unconscionable. It is unfair, unexpected of a mother, and that is why throughout the play repeatedly she is referred to as no mother, because she does not express motherly love and affection for her children as is expected by the children and the readers. And Electra's treatment by Clytemnestra is also obvious to Orestes, who certainly does not recognize Electra after all these years. He was too young to remember Electra's face or how she looked. So when he visits the palace and comes here and finds Electra among other characters, initially he does not know how this woman, this young lady, is related to him. But despite that, after she expresses her grief over the news of her brother's death and the urn that contains his ashes, he realizes that this lady must be related to the dead man by blood relation, and he notices her not so good appearance. He finds her in a miserable condition. That is why he comments on Electra's appearance, saying, "It shocks me the way you look. Do they abuse you?" So even Orestes, as a stranger, finds it quite obvious that Electra is not treated well by her family. So he notices her emaciated visage and poor garments that she is wearing, despite the fact that she is the daughter of the reigning queen and a heroic father who has been unfortunately murdered instead of being celebrated as a hero after coming from the Trojan War. So, this is Sophocles' rendition of Electra's story. As I told you in the beginning, that this story has been dramatized by all three great Greek tragedians, including Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. Euripides, in his own rendition of Electra's story, has actually used another dramatic device. In that play, we find Electra married off to a peasant, a villager, and she is living a hard life like that of a slave. So again, he uses this marriage to a villager device in order to highlight this unmotherly treatment, this unfair treatment of Electra by Clytemnestra, who allows her to get married to this villager who is certainly far below her social status. So next we have the chorus speaking their dialogues after listening to Electra's speech. They express their sympathy, feelings of affection for the plight of this young princess. But at the same time, they advise her to control her emotions and not express her anger so openly, because if Augustus somehow overhears her, he'll certainly punish her for her stubbornness. Probably you might have noticed after reading the play that Augustus exemplifies male dominance in Greek tragedy, in Greek society. And he does not allow Electra to mourn her father's death openly and publicly. That is why she is always confined to her house and is not allowed to go out. When the chorus express their fear about Justice's possible action against Electra's outbursts, we can infer that it shows how powerful Augustus is as a man. So this again reinforces sexist nature of Greek tragedy. Now let me here explain briefly what sexism means. Sexism means discriminatory attitude and treatment of people on the basis of their sex. Now these are two terms which you need to understand because they are sometimes confused with each other. How a term sex is different from gender. The former term sex refers to the biological differences between men and women. On the other hand, gender refers to socially accepted behavior and actions of both male and female. So here Augustus is more powerful because he is a man. But at the same time, Electra's insistence and courage to express her anger exemplifies her defiance to submit to Aegisthus's power and authority. Although she knows Aegisthus has all the power to do her a lot of damage, but despite that, she cannot resist standing up and speaking out against the injustice that Clytemnestra has committed in collaboration with Aegisthus. Next we have Chrysothemis, sister of Orestes and Electra, appearing on stage, and this is the first time she comes on stage. And in her dialogues we find she responds to Electra's excessive mourning and her desire for revenge against Aegisthus. Now, one thing that stands out about Chrysothemis is her approach, her viewpoint on Agamemnon's murder by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. Unlike Electra, she is not as furious and adamant to seek revenge as Electra is. She is rather very cautious and wants to protect herself against Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, who certainly have the power to do anything. Now, this very approach of Chrysothemis, finding Clytemnestra and Aegisthus potentially harmful for her, again strengthens two things: Clytemnestra's unfair treatment of her children, that even Chrysothemis believes if she behaves the same way as Electra is doing, she will not be spared by Clytemnestra or Aegisthus. So she is here actually contrasted in her approach with Electra's heroic but reckless courage. Undoubtedly, Electra is courageous. She has extraordinary belief, extraordinary resistance, and unwillingness to compromise her father's assassination. But at the same time, we know that her action might receive cruel response, violent reaction from a person like Aegisthus, who will certainly try to silence her and do everything he can to save himself against Electra's protests. So here Chrysothemis overlooks the crime in order to live a comfortable life, not to make things difficult for herself. If we look at certain dialogues spoken by Chrysothemis, they again help us understand the man-woman status in Greek society. And remember, this is the point I mentioned in the very first discussion on the play, that Sophocles has explored the status of women in Greek society. So this is quite obvious in Chrysothemis's dialogues. If we look at her entry speech, in which she is responding to Electra's mourning and desire for revenge, there are dialogues which are very significant, and they should be underlined and analyzed for the sake of better understanding of the play. So in that speech, she says at one point, if I want to live a free woman, there are masters who must be obeyed. So this is her conception of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, that these people who are in power, who possess the power of throne, must be obeyed. Otherwise, if we defy their authority, they certainly will punish us. And then, in the same speech, she says, in rough waters, lower the sail is my theory. Why pretend to be doing unless I can do some real harm? So if you look at the very first sentence in this dialogue, in rough waters, lower the sail is my theory, signifies that Chrysothemis is ready to overlook her father's assassination in order to secure peaceful life for herself, instead of standing up for justice and offending the killers. And as the play proceeds, at another point she says, let's just say there are times when justice is too big a risk. So these dialogues actually reveal Chrysothemis's compromising approach. She wants to forget about what happened in the past and ignore the crime of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus and accept their authority just in order to make her own life easy and peaceful. And during the same speech, the entry speech, at one point she says, I tell you, we have masters we must bend. And as we progress in our discussion, I'll further highlight how Chrysothemis thinks of women as less powerful and subordinate to men. So she actually conceives women, thinks of women as powerful and ineffectual against men. Now, this viewpoint actually persuades her not to hatch up a plan, not to think of a scheme to seek her father's revenge, because she knows socially she is powerless and whatever she plans will not work out in their favor. Instead, they will only invite Aegisthus's anger, and he can be expected to perform any action, any big action of punishment for all those people, no matter how they belong to Clytemnestra. I mean, if he treats Electra and Chrysothemis, who are daughters of the reigning queen, the ruling queen, obviously nobody has the power to protest against the injustice that has been committed by these two. So, in conclusion, we can say that Chrysothemis is shrewd and calculating. She is very practical. She is, to some extent, selfish. She wants to manage a peaceful life instead of uh, performing a heroic deed and endanger her life. So we'll continue with the discussion in our upcoming lectures. Thank you.